Right, good morning, members. Thank you for attending this additional meeting of the authority on Friday the 20th of June 2025 for this one particular paper. Going into the agenda, the first item, apologies for absence. I have apologies from Mike Chaplin, Janet Dugdale, Andrew Gregory, Bill Hanley, Andrew Hart, Chris O'Leary, Ginny Priestley and Jean Warmby. And Yvonne Witter is coming by bus, and obviously that hasn't arrived yet, but she will be here in due course. Does anyone bring any apologies from anyone else? Okay, thank you. I've not been informed of any urgent business or public participation. Are there any declarations of interest that members wish to make? If not, thank you very much. We'll move on in a moment to agenda item 5. But just before we do that, unfortunately it's in her absence, but just so that members are aware, I would like to offer our collective congratulations, if you deem it appropriate, to Yvonne Witter, who was mentioned in the King's birthday honours list and is now Yvonne Witter MBE. So it's unfortunate that she's not here to receive our congratulations, but we will obviously see her during the day, so I'll leave it to individuals to pat her on the back or whatever you feel is appropriate. Personally, I've sent her an email congratulating her, as has the Deputy Chair as well, but I think that's really great. And it's for her work with Mosaic in Sheffield and the Peak District and the rest, so that's really wonderful news, as I have said to her, fully deserved. Okay. So agenda item 5 then, a short paper, which is something of a technicality, a technical issue, I think. I assume that everyone has read the paper and the attached appendix. Members, there is a recommendation, but are there any comments that members wish to make on this particular issue? Ken Richardson.
Yeah, reading through the paper, and I've no problem with it, but I just wonder how the audit function is going to work, because bringing it audit, we'd only just started the audit committee, we received presentations, bringing that to full committee amongst already full agendas doesn't seem appropriate. Whilst it's in here, I would recommend that the audit committee maintains, but staffed from the planning committee, because nobody on resource committee can actually serve on audit committee because they're the primary decision makers.
Interesting. Thank you for that comment, Ken. Emily, Angela, would you like to respond to that suggestion?
Yep, so the proposal in front of you is based on being in line with and in the spirit of the SIPFA guidance, which says that you can't have budget monitoring and audit in the same committee, which is why we've now asking members that authority looks at audit and budget monitoring remains within the resources committee. In larger organisations that do have an audit committee, but given the scale of our authority and given the level of risk of most of our audit findings, we just didn't think that was proportionate, particularly at a time when we're looking for efficiencies across staff and how we're working with members. I think, coming more directly to your question, where we know that we've got audit coming to authority, I think we will need to programme in those meetings so that we have got the time to have those discussions. I think we've also got the mechanisms that if there was something more significant, we could call a special meeting just to look and delve deeply into the audit element, and then it come back to a different authority to approve it if that discussion was needed. So overall, I think we're comfortable that with a bit of organisation from our perspective and making sure that authority has the time, that this seems like the most appropriate committee.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Ken. Patrick Brady.
Well, the same point that Ken's just made occurred to me, but from a slightly different direction. I'm a bit baffled as to why the Resources Committee cannot do what we originally said it should do, which is to look at audit and then recommend the authority so that the authority had the final say. And why it has to be taken away completely. And I don't understand why, if audit cannot be dealt with by the Resources Committee looking at finance, why it can be dealt with in full authority, which also looks at finance. The comings and goings of SIPFA have always fascinated me, and I've never really understood their approach to local governments. But for me, this doesn't make sense at all at the moment. Our original proposals, which was to allow the detail to be dealt with at the Resources Committee and then for the conclusions to come to us for final decision as the full authority, seemed to me to be totally workable. And it in part responds to what Ken was saying. But otherwise, I mean, the idea we have to call full meetings of the authority in order to deal with audit issues sounds to me to be rather more expensive than calling in 3 or 4 people into a little audit committee to handle it separately.
Thank you, Pat.
Chairman, I'm ambivalent as to whether we approve this or not. But I do think that we've got to give some more thought to this over the next year. Because it seems a bit like me at the moment, it seems a bit incoherent.
I won't pass comment on that last element. Yeah, but I think what we have to recognise is that we have gone to our auditors, internal auditors, have asked for advice, and this is the advice they've given us, that it's most appropriate for it to come to the full authority rather than to a part of the authority, which is the Resources Committee, and the kind of poacher turned gamekeeper, that Resources Committee being both poacher and gamekeeper, as it were. Is that analysis reasonable?
Yeah. Can I say something?
Please do.
I think it's just worth mentioning that the SIP for guidance, first of all, is just that. It's guidance, it's not law. But also it's written for traditional local authorities that are politically controlled. So the safeguards within it are to prevent political agendas affecting and impacting on the proper scrutiny. Of course, we're not a political organisation, but we are a local authority. So our internal auditors require us to try and comply with this, even though it doesn't quite apply to us. So we're in this bit of a difficult situation, which is why we've tried to come up with this scenario to try and resolve and please everybody. That's my comment.
Thank you, Angela. Charles Greaves. Ken Rustage.
Patrick and Angela have pretty much covered my point. I'd like to see this approved today. I think we need to revisit the point that the auditors have made. I think actually the governance of the Park Authority is very different to that of a local authority. It's much closer to the governance format of most town and parish councils. The SIP for guidance does relate to principal authorities and the police authorities, but I wonder whether or not the internal auditors have looked at NALC proper practices, which is probably a more appropriate fit for our governance structure. So I think it's a case of maybe coming back to this point in the future, but I really would like to see it passed today. So if nobody else has moved it, I'm happy to move it.
Okay, thanks, Charles. Thanks for the comment and for moving the item. And I do agree. I think if it is approved by members, then it's reviewed at least in a year's time to see how effective or otherwise it has been. Ken Rustage.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to support what Ken said and Patrick. I mean, it's only the SIP who's advised us. I mean, the point is, why couldn't it be like Ken said, where we went through the existing system, then it went to the full authority for approval? You know, you're then taking that layer away and giving more work for someone else. It doesn't seem to make sense. Why can't we have it that way as a halfway house? Then basically you do that, then go to the authority. I'm not saying they rubber stamp it. They might find that they've, found a fault in that, and that's what they should be doing. I'm not too sure about that.
Okay. Well, I think the explanations have already been given stand. So my understanding is that full authority has to approve the audited accounts anyway. So in a sense, one could argue that it's cutting out a level, but at the same time, we're perhaps not getting the degree of scrutiny, which is, I think, the point that Ken Richardson is making. Any other comments, members? Ken Richardson.
It's not just audited accounts we're talking about, though, because audit committee were looking at projects while they were running and how they're performing. It's a case of we've got time to look at projects in depth and get a good understanding on them. I just go back to my first point. The resource committee approves the projects to start with. I know it's by the authority, but they look at them to start with and say, that's a runner. And in the past, it seems that's all they've done. And then it's come to an end. Oh, you've done a good job there, haven't you? But everything in between. And I understand that's not being looked at too closely, which we were starting to do.
Sure. Thank you for that, Ken. Simon.
Yeah, I have to say I agree with everything that's been said. The audit committee was set up for a purpose, and that was to allow time for proper scrutiny. So I'd support Patrick's suggestion that the resources committee should continue to do that work, but on an advisory basis, not making a decision. The decision made by full authority. But having said that, I would pass this now, but recommend passing the resolution now, but suggest we have a review in rather less than 12 months.
Okay. Well, in that case, I think it would be appropriate to keep it under constant review. And if there is an issue, then it comes back to authority for rectification. Okay?
Yeah.
On that basis, members, the recommendation has been moved. Do we have a seconder? Simon? Well, Ken Richardson as well. All those in favour, please show. Any against? Any abstentions? 2 abstentions. Thank you, members. That recommendation has now been passed, and we can spend the next 15 minutes waiting for the bus